Hello! Another longish video with the fourth chapter from Ed Sexton's very short book Dawkins and the Selfish Gene, Selfishness and Altruism. This is the most important chapter in the book. How do we explain the trait of altruism that humans display? If selection was taking place at the level of individuals, those with the altruistic trait will be outcompeted in reproduction by the selfish ones. The better explanation of altruism is the gene theory of evolution by Richard Dawkins. Selfishness and altruism. We can now see what it means to talk of, in inverted commas, selfish genes. It doesn't mean that genes are devious, self-interested bits of DNA hell-bent on manipulating their environment to their advantage. It simply means that those genes which affect their environment in such a way that they proliferate, often at the expense of other, in brackets, in inverted commas, rival genes, will, proliferate. In inverted commas, nice genes that help their competitors at their own expense will die out. That's all there is to it. Given that in most circumstances all genes in an organism share a common method of proliferating via reproduction, we will expect organisms to act in such a way as to maximize their own chances of reproducing, often at the expense of others. Furthermore, in inverted commas, others in this context is not just other species, it includes members of the same species, even members of the same group. In fact, we might expect organisms to behave more selfishly in their dealings with their own species, since these are the individuals they are competing against for resources such as food, shelter, or mates. There are countless examples of such selfish behavior. I will mention just one, a quotation. Male lions who, when newly arrived in a pride, sometimes murder existing cubs, presumably because these are not their own children. Close the quotation. So much for animals acting for the good of the species. However, remember that it is the genes that are calling the shots here, not the organism. If genes cared about anything, which obviously they don't, it certainly wouldn't be the organism. The organism is merely a vehicle, genes' method of copying themselves. There are numerous situations in which genes' interest is best served not by having the organism stubbornly competing against other individuals, but by cooperating or even helping them, which raises the flip side of the selfishness coin, altruism. Strictly speaking, altruism refers to behavior which lowers the altruistic individual's chances of reproducing while increasing the chances of the lucky recipient. The term is also used in situations where there is no obvious harm done to the altruist. Pedants who need to justify the strict meaning can view energy and time costs as the, in inverted commas, harm done. Organisms clearly are altruistic in this sense. Think of the efforts that parents make to protect their children. But why? The problem evaporates when we remind ourselves that it is genes that matter, not individuals. From the genes' point of view, it is obvious that parents should take risks in protecting their children because those children are the vehicle which will carry them through another generation. For some reason, people see the parent-child relationship as somehow different, as something that does not need explanation. Yet, those same people demand an explanation for altruism between other relatives and between individuals not obviously related at all. Keeping to relatives for the moment, we can see that from the gene's point of view, there is no difference between the mother-child relationship and the brother-sister relationship. In both cases, the chances of a gene which is present in one being present in the other is 50%. A quotation. We can now see that parental care is just a special case of kin altruism. Genetically speaking, an adult should devote just as much care and attention to its orphaned baby brother as it does to one of its own children. In practice, brotherly or sisterly care is nothing like so common in nature as parental care. Close the quotation. One reason why parental care is so much more common is that, while in terms of their relatedness to you, your children and siblings may be identical, in practice there are important differences between them. For example, your children will probably have more of their reproductive lives ahead of them than your siblings, and thus represent a better investment in brackets in gene terms. Similarly, we should expect individuals to show altruism towards other relatives in proportion to their relatedness to them, subject to a variety of conditions of which reproductive expectancy is just one. This explanation of kin altruism is often called, in inverted commas, kin selection, and was elegantly described in mathematical terms by William Hamilton in 1964. Of course, the genes are not behaving altruistically, they are merely helping other vehicles which are likely to contain copies of themselves. Some may immediately see a defense of, in inverted commas, the good of the species argument hidden here. Surely, they cry, given that all members of a species share a very large number of genes, we should expect this kin altruism to extend to all the organism's peers. After all, in some sense, they are all relatives. One response is that it is a case of diminishing returns. If your sister needs half of your supper to survive, it may be worth sharing. There is only a small chance that you will suffer malnourishment, and she is highly related to you. If it's your third cousin once removed, however, you will still have to expend the same effort and take the same risks to help him. But the benefit is greatly reduced, as he is a fairly distant relative. An organism only has so much time and energy, and there will come a point when it simply will not be worth it, as far as propagating genes is concerned anyway. Another issue is the problem of estimating your relatedness to the prospective beneficiary. If you are going to make a judgment about whether or not to help an individual, you must know how closely related you are to him or her, i.e., what the chances are of you sharing any one particular gene. Since animals clearly do not engage in complex mathematical calculations, there are more direct rules to judge your relatedness to someone, such as physical likeness. You can probably see family resemblances in most of your close relatives. The further you move away through the family tree, the harder this process becomes. While you may be able to judge that your brother looks more like you than your cousin, telling your third cousin from your fourth could prove tricky. This does mean, of course, that we may expect animals which live in extended family groups generally to behave altruistically to other members of the group. Some would claim that this is a form of group selection. In brackets, in inverted commas, the good of the group, close the inverted commas, argument, close the brackets. And indeed it may look that way at first. However, it is genes that are being selected, and the epiphenomenon, in brackets, side effect, of the group behaving as a cooperative unit only results from the fact that the group members are reasonably close relatives. If the group was regularly infiltrated by non-relatives, the behavior would never have evolved, or at least group members would develop a method of discriminating between their true relatives and the imposters. Yet, altruism also occurs between organisms that have no obvious relation to each other, or no obvious way of knowing whether or not they are related. Birds shout warning calls when they spot predators, monkeys groom each other, and so on. How can selfish gene theory possibly explain these cases? The answer is reciprocal altruism. The idea that, in inverted commas, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, close the inverted commas. Dawkins succinctly outlines the conditions necessary for reciprocal altruism to occur. A quotation: "If animals live together in groups, their genes must get more benefit out of the association than they put in," close the quotation. He goes on to list some examples. A quotation: "A pack of hyenas can catch prey so much larger than a lone hyena can bring down that it pays each selfish individual to hunt in a pack, even though this involves sharing food. It is probably for similar reasons that some spiders cooperate in building a huge communal web. Emperor penguins conserve heat by huddling together," close the quotation. Incidentally, this last example is related to a more general explanation of, in inverted commas, bunching behavior in animals. Many animals, particularly grazing herbivores, seem to have a gregarious nature. Dawkins summarizes Hamilton's theory that bunching behavior is the product of a selection pressure from predators. The idea is that each grazing animal obviously does not want to be the nearest to any predators in the area. How can it achieve this? By surrounding itself with other members of the group. That way, they are more likely to be eaten. Unfortunately, everyone wants the same thing, and in a real herd, someone will have to be on the outside. Hence, a quotation. There will be a ceaseless migration in from the edges of an aggregation towards the center. If the herd was previously loose and straggling, it will soon become tightly bunched as a result of the inward migration, even if we start our model with no tendency towards aggregation at all, and the animals start by being randomly dispersed. The selfish urge of each individual will be to reduce his domain of danger by trying to position himself in a gap between other individuals. Close the quotation. As Dawkins points out, there is no reciprocal altruism involved here. The physical closeness of the individuals does not imply any cooperative behavior, merely that there is a good, in brackets, selfish, reason for being physically close. Surely the huddling behavior of penguins is similar, in that it is presumably colder at the edges of a huddle than at the center. Yet, we still have to explain behavior which exhibits true reciprocal altruism. Under what conditions will animals cooperate? When will genes, in inverted commas, get more benefit out of the association than they put in, close the inverted commas? The well-known prisoner's dilemma, the basis of much game theory, provides an answer. The original form of the dilemma went something like this. You are one of two prisoners charged with a heinous crime. If both of you confess to the crime, you will each receive 10 years. However, if you confess and your, in inverted commas, partner doesn't, you will get off with just 6 months and he will go down for 20 years. At this stage, confessing looks sensible. After all, if your partner does and you don't, you'll get 20 years, when you could have reduced it to 10. If he is a true friend and keeps his mouth shut, you can be out in 6 months by betraying him. But what happens if both of you refuse to talk? In this dilemma, mutual cooperation has a benefit, because there is only enough evidence to imprison each of you for a year. But if you are interrogated separately, you will not be able to reach this agreement. There is no way to be sure your partner won't confess and stick you behind bars for 20 years. Whatever your partner does, you're better off confessing. Either you'll get 6 months instead of a year, or 10 years instead of 20. As both of you are thinking like this, you both confess and end up with 10 years, and to think you could have been out in 1. The dilemma comes from the problem of not being able to trust your partner. If you've been in similar situations with him before, however, you will presumably have developed a trusting friendship and will hence cooperate to get a 1-year sentence. This is the key. While confessing, in brackets defecting, is the only sensible, in brackets selfish, strategy in a one-off prisoner's dilemma, in a repeated encounter it is possible to take previous behavior into account. So which strategy is most effective in a repeated prisoner's dilemma? Should prisoners always cooperate, or perhaps cheat on each other occasionally? If so, how often? Dawkins discussed the work of Robert Axelrod, who set out to find the best strategy in a prisoner's dilemma using computer modeling. On a computer, many different strategies can be rapidly played off against each other over hundreds of encounters, with scores corresponding to prison sentences. Despite many deviously complicated strategies, to this day the most successful remains one of the simplest, called Tit-for-Tat. Tit-for-Tat starts off by being nice and cooperating. After that, it simply copies its opponent, in brackets, or partner, depending on how you look at it, close the brackets. So if it is cheated on the first round, it will retaliate on the second round. This may lead to both sides retaliating endlessly, but at least Tit-for-Tat will have suffered the, in inverted commas, 20-year penalty only once, at the start. If it meets nice strategies that don't cheat, a never-ending period of harmonious cooperation will result. So how does this relate to the evolution of altruistic behavior? Prisoners' dilemmas are bound in nature. The, in inverted commas, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours scenario is repeated in countless forms in animal interactions. Should I cheat and not scratch your back? In this example, there is a delay between paying the cost and receiving the benefit, but the overall situation mirrors the prisoner's dilemma. In nature, of course, the rewards aren't measured in terms of scores or reduced prison sentences. They are handed out as offspring. So a behavior which is successful, as repeated in inverted commas prisoners' dilemmas, will tend to spread in the population. This is especially good news for tit-for-tat, as we have seen that it performs best when it encounters other tit-for-tatists. Note that a saintly strategy, which was always nice, whatever its opponent did, would do just as well in this scenario. In fact, it would be impossible to tell apart a population of saints and a group of tit-for-tatists. But there is one important difference. While the tit-for-tatists will weed out any cheats that infiltrate the group by retaliating against them, the saints can be exploited to extinction by such cheats. And natural selection based on mutation ensures that there will always be selfish cheats popping up to take advantage of any suckers out there. In some sense, tit-for-tat is a more stable strategy. It is less open to invasion from other strategies. Dawkins follows Maynard Smith in referring to it as an evolutionarily stable strategy, or ESS. An ESS is a quotation, a strategy which, if most members of a population adopted, cannot be bettered by an alternative strategy. Close the quotation. Or, as he rephrases it in the 1989 edition, a quotation, a strategy that does well against copies of itself. Close the quotation. Theory does in fact suggest that the population of tit-for-tat can be invaded to a small degree by other strategies. So we might want to say that some mixture of strategies, mostly tit-for-tat, is an ESS. The other strategies will be partly saints who will be exploited by some cheats, so the population ends up reflecting a spectrum from, in inverted commas, saint to, in inverted commas, cheat, with the, in inverted commas, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours mentality dominating. As Dawkins comments, a quotation, some might see this as a mirror for familiar aspects of human life. Close the quotation. Necessarily brief as this explanation of reciprocal altruism has been, I hope it convinces the reader that it is perfectly possible and indeed likely that genes for such behavior will evolve under natural selection and in accordance with selfish gene theory. There are some times when it simply pays to cooperate, no matter how selfish you are. There is plenty more that can be said by way of example, an application of theory to explain and illustrate Dawkins' selfish gene theory. Before moving on to criticisms and problems with Dawkins' view, I will conclude with an outline of three of the many areas to which Dawkins applies his theory: symbiosis, deciding when to have children, and the problem of the opposite sex. These topics will be discussed in the following videos. Thank you for listening. Bye!